The funny thing is, after all my talk about how aloof and elusive flappers are, my longest inside adventure actually involved moving in with a bird. I'm not kidding, the real deal, not some tin toy on a shelf or cuckoo in a clock. The flapper's name was Sandy. And just in case you're thinking I had another change of heart with the crows, she was nothing of the sort. Sure, she had a few things in common, like the beak face, feather coat, flying flaps, those perching feet like creepy people paws with a finger bitten off, a penchant for pecking, and all kinds of edgy mannerisms. Okay, she had a lot, really. But underneath all of that, she was a completely different flapper, maybe what a crow could have been if the world, and obviously the underworld, hadn't twisted them into what we see today. Sometimes I think about what the park could have been like if it had been colonized by sandybirds instead of the murky scourge. I might have even gone down there to live full-time, as long as Carl helped me move my tartan sofa near the pond, ideally just behind the tallest reeds.
Now, you're probably imagining I was on some flapper hunt when I met this bird friend of mine, maybe looking for another leashed emerald treasure. But that's the crazy thing about it. It happened while I was on a gold lick hunt of all things.
You'll have the best chance of locating gold lick on kitchen counters, though people often lock their windows on the ground floors, which is the #1 problem for room raiders regardless of skill.
Don't despair. The trick is to raise your horizons. You see, hindwalkers get pretty lazy with security from the first floor upwards. They figure no one can climb in, I suppose. But then they go and plant trees right next to their buildings. Maybe it's an example of that double brain problem again. Without giving a whole seminar on striking gold lick, or room raids in general, the most important thing to avoid in a kitchen is knocking off bangers and smashers, as it's the fastest way to alert hindwalking inhabitants of a building den. This is where tail control is so important.
Obviously, if you bang down a pot or tile smash a plate with any people about, your hunt is as good as done, and their hunt will begin. But don't underestimate the incredible commotion a single fork can make, especially a bouncer. And in some places, even rattle a spoon on a saucer and it can be all over. Pork skin ears aren't the most sensitive. They really lack scoop and sit too low on the head, all shriveled up like they died and dried out one summer but never peeled off. Plus, they're always stuck in one direction, and are often blocked with flopping fur or even hat hides. Not sure what their gods were thinking.
But you shouldn't underestimate the things either. Some people will put a hand to their stunted ear to imitate a proper cat scoop, and squeeze a bit more out of them in a pinch. You'll even see females hanging metal weights from the ear blobs, possibly to stretch the scoops out and increase their hearing power for gossip and eavesdropping. And even though these faulty ears of theirs can't hear all that far, they seem to be very smart at hearing, if you know what I mean. They're really good at telling one sound from another and who or what is making it. It's probably because people make such strange sounds when they talk, and if the ears weren't smart, none of them would tell the difference between words and all the weird noise works around town. So there I was on a gold lick expedition, and I'd spotted double windows swung wide open on a second story, with a nice big tree rising right up past the little balcony ledge. The type people build for keeping plants but can't walk out upon to pester the neighborhood.
The black railing wasn't much more than a cat's height and had some plant boxes hung off it with leaves streaming down like locks of hindwalker head fur. There were 2 little stools on the ledge, one with a large pot of Herbie plant fur and the other with a domed cage. Some more flower pots littered the place. It was almost like a snug little park in the sky. Of all the plant-sprouting balconies in the building, this one was the most impressive.
But most importantly, I caught a wafting trace of butter from that den. Meower snouts aren't the longest in the world, but believe me, they know how to snag a scent. I'd found my mark, though out of normal range, since these little balconies are usually too hard to leap upon past the ground floor. But with this big old tree on my raiding team, there was suddenly an opportunity for any bandit bold enough.
Up the tree I went, and as I got level, just climbing onto the branch that crossed in jumping distance, this bird started screeching away from that cage.
It was a little red number, tiny beak but the volume of an ice cream wagon flute box. In fact, I thought she was the perfect size to stuff in one of those crunchy cones, actually, maybe with a drizzle of caramel sauce on top.
Anyway, I stared down that feisty flapper, hoping to scare its bloody seeds Cooper shut, because it's no point having silent stalking skills when you've got some miniature police siren going off every time you place a paw. I stuck close to the trunk, ready to retreat, waiting for a hindwalker reaction somewhere. But nobody arrived on the scene.
So I skipped along the branch, jumped onto the herb pot topping the stool next to the cage, and scouted through the swung windows. The kitchen seemed clear, and I detected gold lick nearby, but the bird still kept at it. And I then wondered whether she was wanting me to help her escape from that cage of hers.
Flappers are always getting stuck in things, not just the fledglings. Basically, as soon as you take them out of the sky, they're bound to get stuck somewhere, in branches, arcades, rooms, you name it. And of course they rarely cooperate when you're helping them free.
When I was younger, I couldn't quite understand how flappers got inside these cages, though, because the gaps looked far too small. And it seemed like unbelievably bad luck to fly straight into a cage while the door was left open, even by Gloomtown standards.
Of course, I realized later that hindwalkers must have lured them in there with treats, then slammed the door shut when the birds were munching away. A similar dirty trick to the mousetrap, really. But it was a lot dirtier because at least mousetraps still left rodents in paw's reach and you could help drag them out again.
So I started rattling at the door, trying to undo all that underhanded hindwalker work. But the bird went crazy and buzzed round the cage, smacking into the wire. Feather Fluff was going everywhere. I hadn't got the knack of her accent. Like I said before, my bird speak is pretty basic. But I got the idea she wanted to stay inside for some reason.
And I thought at first it was just her being a flapper and panicking at the world in general, down to the windblown leaves.
But when I had a closer look, I could understand. She had some food and water in little trays and a specially made perch to sit on. She even had some toys hanging about, more than I had growing up, that's for sure.
In the end, it was actually a nice little lair in there. This bird had really made the most of the situation and turned it to her advantage. That impressed me, I must say. It reminded me of myself and what I'd done with my alley.
But I was getting distracted. I remembered why I was there, for Gold Lick, and stepped through the window onto the kitchen sink, every cat sense on edge.
I tracked the treasure in no time, and there it was, cut up into precious gold cubes on a silver tray, right on the nearby counter beside the bread, which can often lead you right to it if you're just starting out.
I didn't even have to deal with a lid, and so spearing 2 cubes with my fangs, I climbed back out onto the balcony stool. The herb pot on top made a nice furry cushion, and I sat there enjoying the view while I ate, while remaining in prime escape position, with a wary ear scoop turned within.
If you're wondering why I only took a couple of butter cubes when I could have gorged the whole stack, I'll explain in a moment. The bird was a little more relaxed now I was licking the luxurious loot. So was I. The aroma was painting a masterpiece mural inside my nose caves. Really, it was pristine Gold Lick, fresh from, well, wherever it happens to come from. I'm no expert on the matter, but just using a little casual philosophy, I know that since butter has the taste of critter running deep, it must come from one, and I'm definitely leaning towards a four-legger. And as butter is soft like liver paste, I believe it could also be some kind of chunky innard all mashed up and set into blocks to store easily on kitchen shelves. But as I've never dug out any raw Gold Lick from my kills, even near the livers, and believe me, I've looked, its exact whereabouts beyond hindwalker dens has me stumped for now. I've already got enough trouble locating the flat flappers though, so one mystery hunt at a time, I think. Anyway, this stuff is delicious and nutritious no matter where it comes from. And as I was lapping away, I realized I'd never sat next to a living bird so long in my life. They'd always been impossible to relate to, as I mentioned. But because this flapper was stuck in the cage, she obviously had no choice but to sit still and get to know this kitty critter a little. So that's how me and Sandy met. And I wouldn't say we had a ton to talk about on the first day, but there we were, propped up on our stools behind the rail, watching the hindwalkers below, me keeping my eye out for rats and gutters too, Sandy probably for breadcrumbs and seeds. After a while, we got interrupted by this small flock of sparrows. As soon as I saw them fly into the tree, I hopped down onto the ledge floor and crouched between flower pots. It's just instinct. My copper eyes watched them through the rails and streaming locks of leaf. Next, they made their way along the near branch and started mouthing off at Sandy. I couldn't quite get exactly what they were saying, but by the way they were barking out of those beaks and dancing around, I just got the feeling they were having a real go at her. Probably they were mocking her about the fact she was trapped in a cage and didn't get to fly around and land in trees and live a normal flapper life. Just say the word and I'll put them to roost, I hissed gently to Sandy, because I guess I felt a bit of loyalty since we'd been sharing the little balcony ledge that day. And besides, there's nothing worse when you're just enjoying some well-earned tranquility away from the bustling trauma of town life, striking Gold Lick and enjoying the view, and bad eggs take it upon themselves to ruin it. It seems Sandy didn't want to do anything about the problem though. I could tell she was a gentle soul, probably never even pecked a bug out of grass. And still these sparrows wouldn't leave her be. Well, one of the sparrows flew over to a planter hung on the rail top just in front of me and started beak bellowing away from there. Sometimes one little decision is all it takes to change your life. And that was the case for this fellow of the feather. I mean, there are poor decisions. Then there are the worst decisions you'll ever make. I sprung up from the plant cover and snatched him between the paws. He tried to wrestle, but my white-socked kill paw had a perfect lock, as it so often does, and he didn't have a chance. Instantly, the other sparrows made some of the best decisions they ever made to flap themselves home. And let's just say once I'd properly secured the prey, it got a whole lot calmer all of a sudden, just how the inside is supposed to be. I left the dead bird in a pot, and climbed back upon the Herbie stool since I was in the middle of my gold lick and thought I'd save the meat for dinner. It's also a little easier to carry home than gold lick, particularly when the sun's out. Another handy hint for warm weather raiders out there. Unfortunately, we hadn't been sitting for long before we were rudely interrupted again. I heard a door open inside, then those telltale clonk-clonk hind-walking steps, and I really should have bolted. But I was so comfortable out there, I thought I'd wait and see if it closed itself in another room like they sometimes do, giving me extra time. I gulped my remaining gold lick just in case, but snuck back down between the plants to listen.
And of course this hindwalker had to come straight into the kitchen. It was a spectacled silver-furred female, and although these types are a little slower, blinder and deafer than the younger ones, they can be even more dangerous, having a lifetime of built-up grump in their bones, and often stamped right on their faces.
It was no genuine park hideout there on the balcony ledge, and she spotted me pretty quickly, even with her squinty old gray eyes struggling behind their spectacle panes.
"Sandy!" she cried, checking her bird.
Then she turned on me.
"Down ya sneaky beast!" she yelled. "Morty, for the millionth time. I'd have it painted on a collar if wearing one wasn't against my principles."
I jumped to my feet, thinking, here we go, here comes the broom. So I said my goodbyes to Sandy and went to grab the meal I'd prepared earlier. But I'd underestimated just how quick this woman was, and before I could grip my flapper, scritch, she's spraying me with window cleaner right in the face.
I had to abandon the prey and sprung onto the stool, lining up the tree branch. It was pretty hard with my eyes stinging like mad and watering like my sofa in winter, and I hesitated a few times while she kept giving me coats of scritching spray. I'm telling you, she didn't miss a spot. I was the cleanest cat in town that night, sparkling like a window pane, and I decided I better just jump before she starts polishing me up with a whipping towel too.
So I made the leap and stuck the landing with a few wobbles. Looking back from the tree, the woman had one hand clasping Sandy's cage and the spray bottle extended towards me, with death in her eyes. "Don't worry, Sandy," she said. "I'll protect you, darling." And I thought, sure lady. Where were you a few minutes ago when the sparrow squad was about to peck her down and raid her seed? Then she inspected the pot on the stool and was further traumatized. "Squashing my chives too," she shrieked. "Hey, Grumpskin, if you don't want anyone sitting on your pungent plant fur, don't stick it on a bloody stool like a cushion." I lingered on the branch because I'd left my dinner on the ledge and was now trying to work out how to retrieve it.
There was also some general defiance mixed in. Going down easy is not in my backstreet bones, particularly when they're feeling pretty hollow. Yes, I'd had my gold lick, but that was a delicacy, not a main course.
The hindwalker shot another volley of fierce sprays at me, although by now I'd retreated down the branch out of scritch range.
"Don't you dare come back here," she warned. "You keep away from my bird."
Well, then the woman let out this pained squeal as she spotted the dead sparrow in the pot.
Oh, the tragedy. Bet she'd roasted hundreds of birds in that kitchen of hers, boiled them, minced them, fried up their flaps to a crispy crunch. But if a dead flapper shows up at her window, suddenly we're at a hound funeral with a crowd of dog-sick ballers. Her eyebrows now dived into her snout joint and she glared at me so hard. Her eyes looked about to pop. I was hoping a stinger-bummed wasp might show up to finish them off, so I could grab the bird while she was blinded.
"Scram alley scum," she screeched. "Killing the peaceful little birds in my neighborhood. Scram. Scram must be their most popular cat name. It's ridiculous how often I'm mistaken. Just hand Scram his dinner and he'll be off," I said. Well, the woman whined away some more, until she finally got the picture, grabbed some tongs, leaned out and lifted the sparrow out the pot. I crept forward on the branch because for some silly reason I actually thought she was going to pass my flapper. Instead, she flung the bird over the railing and it sailed down and ditched into the dirt below. I thought maybe I'd also batter the leftover gold lick in soil next time, see how she enjoys that grit in the gums. Then I shot a nice long hiss at her, straight through her soul, ear-flicked goodbye to Sandy and climbed down the tree. Safely grounded, I grabbed my dirt-crumbed bird and went on my way.